it's time to sell, I found that the best approach is to treat that like a partnership conversation, but to be, you know, put on your best kind of cologne or perfume or whatever and be, as alluring as possible. So when I've approached companies that I thought could buy me, I always approach them under the guise of potential partnership.
Welcome everybody to another episode of Sober Mesa Podcast. Today our guest is my friend Trevor Traina, who has an amazing list of accomplishments. Trevor founded several tech companies, sold it to the likes of Microsoft and MasterCard, and not happy with that, he went on to become the US ambassador to Austria. So an amazing and multifaceted guest. I can't wait to get right into it. Welcome to the show, Trevor.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Trevor, so let me ask you, what's the point of all of this? I mean, you were born into a very privileged background, a very wealthy family with people like H.H. Dow, founder of Dow Chemical, part of your family tree. And then you went on to become this super successful businessman, didn't stop there, became US ambassador to Austria. How did being born in this golden cradle, so to speak, affected your perception on risk or your approach to risk taking in life and in professional settings?
Well, it's funny because we hear so often the kind of rags to riches story. Unfortunately, sometimes we also hear the riches to rags stories.
Yeah.
It seems like there's more of those every day. But, people always say to me, you're such an anomaly because you grew up maybe not really having to work, and yet you've always worked so hard. And like, what was it about your upbringing that was different, or what motivated you? But I think it was actually, I think it was growing up in a family that had a lot of interesting and dynamic people who I used as my role models. And I just wanted to be like those successful people. I wanted to make my own mark. I didn't want to just sit around. And that was kind of a crazy motivator for me. When I sold my first company to Microsoft, I was still in my 20s, and I made a fair amount of money, and I sat my parents down and I said to them, now you're free to live as long as you want. And they said they were very relieved that I wasn't trying to poison them or push them in front of a train or anything like that. I could wait my time. So, but I think it made me bold. And also the other thing is that I never worried about what would happen if I failed. I knew even if I made a terrible mistake and I failed, that I would still have food on the table or a place to stay. So that safety net made me bold.
But that explains the first one, maybe. It's like, okay, if I fail, it's okay. But then you kept going time and again and again and again, not only in the business world, but also then in the politics world. Like, there must be something else than just like, okay, yeah, there's a safety net, I can try. What do you think is that drive? Do you think it's proving yourself that you can do more than what was just giving you like at first? Do you think there's something else, maybe a chip in your shoulder for some reason? Like, have you thought about this?
Well, I think that there's different motivations for different kinds of endeavors, right? The first company is always the most challenging, the most wonderful, the one where you kind of cut your teeth. I think in my case, there were a couple motivators. The first was, when I sold my first company, I was so young. It's sort of like, what was I going to do? Just sit around for decades and decades doing nothing? I kind of got bored. I missed using my brain, and I missed the whole experience, the camaraderie, building a team, being with a committed group of people, the ups, the downs, the joy, the disappointments. I missed the adrenaline, but more than that, I missed the creating. It's sort of like I'm the type of person who maybe other founders are like me, where it's just I have a constant barrage of ideas. Just, I'm always imagining, dreaming, thinking about things, wondering if something could be optimized, wondering if it could be improved. And I just kept, I couldn't turn off that stream in my brain. And I could see how I could make this happen or that happen. And I just needed to go and do it to keep growing, to keep being a more evolved person.
You talked about other entrepreneurs as well. And when thinking more broadly about people like Elon or Warren Buffett, or even like taking a look at the history, Cornelius Vanderbilt, or like, or even maybe friends like Mark Benioff, or maybe even Arnold, whom Arnold Schwarzenegger, which is pretty popular these days on the new TV show. Like, what do you think drives them? Is it about getting more money than what they already have? Is it trying to wield power, or is it just being in the game, sort of what you explained before?
I think they're, like I was saying, they're different motivations for different kinds of people. So I see a lot of entrepreneurs who are looking to make it, right? They're
Yeah.
hungry. They don't want to be living in a terrible apartment. They want to, break through. They don't have to worry anymore. Which is a huge motivator. And I can think of a lot of entrepreneurs who I've funded, people I've met in business school along the way. They just want to make it, kind of make it big. And so that's kind of one group of entrepreneurs. Then there's another group of entrepreneurs or business people, or whatever you want to call them, who they're kind of playing on another level. For them, it's not about making it, or about comfort, or about money per se. It's about either seeing kind of these once in a lifetime opportunities, and focusing in on creating something that changes the world, or it's just because they're playing on another level and they can, right? I mean, I remember once having a dinner, and it was like Bill Gates and Sergey and Larry and this and or that when you dine with people like that, you just see they're playing on another level. That their level of clarity and insight and knowledge and conviction enables them to do things that a lot of kind of more mortals can't do, right? So it's different. I mean, Arnold is an incredible example. He literally came from nothing and he had very little to offer, but he built himself up, like this hunger from inside. And when I was ambassador to Austria, I'd met him a couple times in
Yeah, because he's
California.
Austrian, right? Born in
He's
Austria.
very Austrian, and
Yeah.
he's from a distant corner of Austria with an accent that is so strong that Austrians told me when he speaks on German-speaking television, they run subtitles. In fact, we used to laugh. I said, we assume German is his first language. And they said, well, we assume English is his primary language because his German is so complicated. But here's a guy who, had didn't have a whole lot of talents, but he had one, and he kind of knew how to hone it and use it to ride a wave. And there are extraordinary people like that.
It's impressive. It's impressive.
I sat with him at the World Downhill Ski Races in Kitzbühel. I was the American ambassador. We were with the governor of the Tyrol, the mayor of Kitzbühel, and Arnold. And I said to him, I was like, Arnold, maybe it's your time again. You're a conservative, but you're an environmentalist. If you ran again in politics, you kind of have something to offer everyone. And he said to me, my life is perfect. Why would I want to ruin it?
That was after he became governor of California, or before?
That was about 2.5, 3 years ago. So that's where he stands now.
Yeah, incredible. And the most impressive thing is that, similar to you, he went from one discipline to the other and sort of tried to play at the peak of its game, from bodybuilding to movie star to politics. And so you have something similar in that regard. And I want to dive first into, we're going to go to politics afterwards. We'll dive into tech and entrepreneurship a little bit. it may be just to paint the picture here, if you can tell us a story about the first company that you started, the first company that you sold, just for context. Trevor started 6 companies, 5 of which sold to in varying degrees of success. So like 6 time on 6 rodeo here for you. But let's start. And there's a lot of common denominators on each of these. So I would like you to tell us the story about the first one, and then we can dive into sort of the takeaways.
Sure. Well, the I guess I grew up just knowing I did not want to work for anyone else. I wanted to work for myself, and that was just my strong conviction. And so I went through university and through business school, just knowing that this is my fate, right? And but I had no idea what I wanted to do. And so one day I was going to a big consumer electronics store and I wanted something very specific. And I talked to the sales guy. He had this like bright red blazer on. And, I said, can you tell me, is there a product that has these features? And he said, well, we don't carry that. And I don't know if anyone else does. I'm just not sure. Right. And I thought, isn't that crazy? He's the expert and he doesn't have all the information, and I'm not being helped as a consumer. And so I thought, what if I could build a website that could really help shoppers know what they wanted to buy before they bought it to make sure they didn't make a mistake.
And
And
this
so
is gonna date you, but we're talking about mid-90s.
this is Web 1.0.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so I said, the other websites are just trying to sell you something. They're not telling you if it's the perfect thing for you or not. And so I came across this concept. I called it CompareNet. It was one of the first comparison shopping websites. And I launched it literally in my father's house, in my younger sister's room. I had like 8 employees, and we had laptops. We would push under the bunk beds at night, when the kids came home. And one day my father came to me and he said, I think it's time for you to get an office. And so I did. I had a partner, and he and I were able to do a round of funding, which was a very complicated process and very scary. But we had literally run out of all the seed capital, couldn't pay anyone. And I had gone to Denver, Colorado to participate in a mobile phone conference because they paid me $2,000. And I thought that would be helpful. And this guy who I met at the conference called me and said, I'm now at GE Capital, and would you like some money for your startup you told me about? And I was like, would I? I mean, literally, we were about to have to close the thing down. And 1 month later, we had $5 million in the bank. And 11 months later, I sold the company to Microsoft for roughly $100 million. And so it was like one of my first important lessons, which is, you never know what the universe will provide you and where it comes from. And so when you're in that position, go everywhere, do everything, meet everyone, because you never know who's going to be the one person you need to help you.
The thing I like about and we can tell the stories, and we're not gonna, because just for the interest of time, but there's a common thread in each of the 5 stories, because the 6th one is still TBD. We'll see what happens. Just getting started. But on the 5 previous companies, you're capitalizing on an emerging opportunity. In this case, Web 1. This is before the craziness of the 2000s and right before the crash. You build a successful and interesting business around it, and then you sell it. And this is, to me, something quite interesting. And I'm not saying that's necessarily what you do. That's just what ended up happening on the majority of those. Let's focus further on the market. I've heard you say and mention the importance of being at the right place at the right time. So the importance of the market and the vertical you're operating in, and then also the importance of timing. So in this sort of impossible debate of what's more important, market or founder, Where'd you lean on, and what's your take? Okay, maybe can you elaborate on that take that we were discussing before?
Yeah, I think it's an age-old debate, and
Yeah.
you see I mean, I love the famous quote of Mark Zuckerberg about Twitter, um, that it was a clown car full of clowns that crashed into a gold mine. And that they just got super super lucky. The market was explosive, right when they were there, and they didn't really know what they were doing. But in my opinion, the founder or the founding team is way more important than the market. So I've founded companies in good times and in bad times. And I don't mean to imply that I'm such a great founder, but it's I think it was in those cases only my stubbornness, like my unwillingness to fail no matter what, that allowed some of those companies to be ultimately successful, because you endure so many tribulations. There's so many unexpected problems, and a great founder will just literally walk through a wall in order to solve the problem. You cannot tell them no. In fact, I've had a lot of instances where people have asked me, should I do this? Should I do that? And I just said to them, no. And the reason why isn't because I don't want them to do something important or to be successful, but if my telling them no was enough for them not to do it, then they would have never been a good founder. I mean, a couple of my most successful companies, people told me, you'll never be successful, you'll never, but it's the ability to kind of write your playbook as you're playing, that to figure things out. That's what makes you successful.
But on the flip side as well, you have operating in the market that's rising, and when the tide rises, and then every single boat out there also rises with you. So there's funding, there's consumer interest, there is easiness to acquire talent. So it's quite important as well. Now,
It is very helpful. Like, everyone wants to be lucky, and it can absolutely amplify your success if you're at the right place at the right time. If you have an easy market, whatever, it can absolutely help. So in a perfect world, you have both. But if you had to pick one, I would still say it's the founder who makes or breaks the whole thing.
yeah. And then on the second piece of what I was saying before, we have the M&A, or the selling of the business. What's the secret behind it, or is there a blueprint that for the founders out there that have been grinding for a couple of years and think, hey, maybe this is the right time to sell? What do you think, having gone through multiple processes, what do you think is the right time to sell? Is it at what you consider the peak? Is it when you foresee a lot of challenges, or how do you measure that timing?
I think that, like, the best analogy for growing a business is like blowing up a balloon, right? So what you want to do is blow the balloon up as large as you possibly can, and tie it off before it pops. Because if it pops, you end up with nothing. If you tie it off, you end up with a large balloon. And so that's the trick, right? And so I've found in my career that at every kind of natural inflection point, maybe post a product improvement or launch, maybe post a funding, or maybe when a funding is due, whenever those points come, you have to have like a serious talk with yourself. Like, where do we really stand here? What am I doing? Do I really believe I can take this thing to the next level? What is the market telling me? And in my case, with each of my companies, there were those moments where it seemed like the best course of action was to sell them, either because that was what they were maximized for, or because having a bigger partner or a bigger owner would allow for things that I just couldn't provide, whether it was a bigger audience, more resources, partnership opportunities, whatever. And so, in the first case, I sold my company because it wasn't uh, it wasn't really worth what I could get for it, and I felt like if I didn't sell it then, I'd have to wait maybe years before it was really worth that. In other cases, it was to tap into larger audiences, but I would still love someday to have an IPO.
Got it. That makes sense. And then as far as how to go about it, let's say you identify the right moment to sell and you're ready to it, but you haven't done it before. What do you think is the best approach? And I've had entrepreneurs ask me before, should I approach the potential buyers? Should I wait for them to approach me? What if they don't approach me at all? Like how should I go about it?
When you're an entrepreneur, you conduct your whole life like you're single at a bar and you're flirting. And I mean that for everything. Your fundraising, your partnerships, even looking to acquire great talent. And so I always tell people, like, you're always fundraising, even if you have the money you need, like you're developing the relationships for the next round. And similarly with partnerships, you're always kind of talking to everyone. When it's time to sell, I found that the best approach is to treat that like a partnership conversation, but to put on your best kind of cologne or perfume or whatever and be, as alluring as possible. So when I've approached companies that I thought could buy me, I always approach them under the guise of potential partnership. And then I express the vision of partnership and the synergies and the opportunities in such a way that if I were on the other side of the table, I would be saying, we need to sew up this opportunity. We need to grab this company and own them in order to achieve those kinds of things. So, I think that's the way to do it, is to present it like I had a board member that said, companies are never sold, they're bought. And so, if you are trying to sell, in some cases, it might telegraph weakness or,
Exactly. Yeah.
um, and so a better way to do it is to make it feel like it's someone else's idea. And I've also found that when you talk to these companies, it's very helpful to have two advocates, a senior one who can sign a document.
On the potential buyer side. Yeah.
Correct.
A champion.
A champion. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. And then a working level contact who also wants to see the deal. Because if you can get those 2 points of leverage, they support each other. One builds the base case, the other is the air cover. And that's often how you get things done.
I think that's such a overlooked skill from entrepreneurs because if you look at, I was talking to a banker the other day and we're going over our portfolio, others' portfolios, and it's like, honestly, with current markets, it's very hard to see an IPO window, an attractive IPO window. Of course, there are outliers in the next 2, 3, 4 years, at least. And so, M&A should be a very favorable exit route. And so, what founders that have done it before, founders that have those skill sets, then they'll be at an advantage versus others. But it's not easy. It's not only the process; it's also how to set it up, how to maximize the value. And so I think these are all great lessons that you're sharing.
It's a careful dance for sure. But the thing is that if you can get into a big company or a big acquirer, there's nothing more exciting for someone who's going to spend most of their career in a big company than to buy something. That's really, really fun. And it's kind of a thrill. So you just have to find the right person and give them that thrill.
That's great. Trevor, and then let's get into your latest adventure, which is Kresus. Tell us a bit more about what is it all about, and then we'll dive into some of the questions as well.
Yeah, well, I really dug into the blockchain, and I am just amazed by what the universal ledger, the blockchain, enables. The fact that all these interactions, these transactions, these contracts are now immutable. They can't be denied. They can't be ignored. They're known to everyone. That's such a game changer. And it's going to affect everything from payment processing, ticketing, loyalty points, title, all these incredible things. And we've seen some early use cases like cryptocurrencies, like NFTs, et cetera, but many more are to come. And I really studied the tools in the space, and I was struck by how primitive they are. Like, the analogy I like to use is all these sort of wallets and things. They're sort of like mushrooms that grow after a heavy rain. They sort of sprouted up overnight, and some of them have very narrow use cases or very specific, but they all kind of grew at once without any kind of long-term vision or plan. And when you look at Web3, look at the blockchain, and you go back to Web 1 and Web 2, the in Web 1 and Web 2, it was the browser or the search window that really drove consumer adoption. And with Web 3, I'm very convinced it's the wallet that really drives engagement and interaction with the platform. And so I looked at these wallets. They all felt very first generation to me. So I decided to kind of start with a clean sheet of paper and build the kind of, I call it a super app. It's kind of a next generation wallet that has all the best safety and convenience, and it's non-custodial, so we can't touch or take anything away, and all the convenience, but that is basically foolproof, right? Where you can never get locked out no matter what. You can't make mistakes. You don't have to have anxiety. Anyone can use it. And I think that that's kind of what's necessary to take the blockchain to the next level.
Trevor, and how are you navigating the current quite challenging environment for Web3 and crypto writ large? And going back to our previous discussion on market, right? You raised around before sort of the crypto crash, which was great. Some of the companies that you founded before benefited from rising market as well as a great team. In this particular moment, very tough for any crypto founder. Great ones, not great ones. We had the founder of Zengo a couple of episodes ago, and he said 2023 will be a really shitty year for crypto founders. And I think we're seeing that, the market has dried up completely, maybe getting harder to get talent from the user perspective, like probably very tough time to start a user-focused, app in the crypto Web3 world. So how are you navigating this, and what do you think are some of the silver linings?
Well, kind of going back to, it's not that I'm like the most incredible founder, but like people who are going to be successful figure stuff out, right? So I think that when I came up with the concept, I imagined that the masses were coming soon to the blockchain. And I think that will happen, but I think that's been delayed probably by a couple years. So, you can point to Starbucks or Nike or LVMH or even Anheuser-Busch that are doing things on the blockchain for mass consumers, but I think that's going to happen slower than originally seeming. But if you look just at the US, there's approximately 30 million people who hold crypto assets, and something like almost 50% of all men aged 25 to 40 hold a crypto asset. So it's not like it's a small market. And so I think that if anything has shifted in my thinking, it's to start with the existing community of people who hold crypto assets. Those people still need a better place. Right now, they're keeping their stuff in, MetaMask and Coinbase, and there's actually structural opportunities because the Binances and the Coinbases and these custodial wallets. It's becoming obvious that that's a terrible place to hold your assets, and so people are going to want a non-custodial where their assets can't be touched or taken, and that's pretty much a huge opportunity, and from there to springboard. So I actually think that the quote unquote crypto winter is great because the ones who should be building the wallet to rule them all, the existing Web 2 companies, they should be doing it, but they're so distracted that they aren't, which creates an incredible market opportunity.
Yeah. Do you have any insights or that you can share or not? Because that's something I was surprised. I'm seeing very big and large brands that are still doubling down on the Web3 concept, maybe shying away from pure cryptocurrencies. But you mentioned a couple of names, and I know you've been in contact with a bunch of brands. I am, I've been surprised with the level of interest despite the crash. Do you have a view on the latest on how brands are looking at the space, and what are some of the things that, or some of the sectors that you think will be more, more transformed sooner, not maybe in 2, 3, 4 years?
Well, we certainly see it in retail and consumer brands. There's all kinds of interesting experiments going on. I mean, in California right now, they're experimenting with putting title on the blockchain at the DMV, for automobiles. And you can point to the Starbucks Odyssey program, which is just constrained because they haven't opened it up to everyone. But from all accounts, they have a demand of millions of people who want to participate. Once they open the gates more broadly, and you can point to companies like Mastercard, which have been experimenting with putting credit card transactions on the blockchain, as well as a number of consumer-related things like music that at Mastercard. And I think that the ticketing is going to be a very logical one because there's so much fraud in ticketing, and the blockchain does away with that, and is just way more efficient. Loyalty points, a lot of things like that, I think are going to happen sooner rather than later.
And I do agree that we don't have the crystal ball. We don't know if the bet is that the consumer wave, the big consumer wave, will come in 2-3 years, or I mean, that it has been delayed and not invalidated. But there is a benefit of keep going now during the winter, and then picking it up whenever, as opposed to shutting down or picking it up in a couple of years. I was chatting to AI founder today that launched in the previous AI bubble in 2018 or 2017. There was the whole craziness around chatbots, and that sort of crashed, and then he kept going, and now he's capitalizing on all of the work that he's done over the past couple of years on the next bubble or the next cycle, which is the current one. So
totally. And, in addition to Google was basically catapulted to success during, a terrible year. And a lot of very successful businesses grew out of very bad periods. But, going back to your comment about AI, these large language models are going to require verified inputs, because one of the knocks on AI is right now the outcomes sometimes are skewed by false data, or bad data. And so I think as AI grows, using the blockchain to verify data, statistics, and information that the large language models can draw from to come up with verified results, I think the two are actually gonna enhance each other.
Trevor, there's a saying in Argentina that goes something like, when you're having a dinner after, or a chat after the dinner, and you're having this sobremesa, which is exactly what we're doing, never discuss politics, religion, or soccer or football. And so I'm going to break that commandment and talk a little bit about politics. Because after going back to our Arnold comment, after crushing it on the entrepreneur side of things, 2018, you became U.S. ambassador to Austria. How did that happen? Was it something you were looking for? How did it happen? Just tell us a bit more about that.
Just don't ask me if I'm Boca or River.
You should say Boca.
Okay, then of course I'll say that. But it was actually kind of a crazy thing. So Peter Thiel was one of my investors in my last company, and Ivanka Trump was an old friend of mine, who I'd known from growing up. And so when President Trump won, they were looking to kind of stack the transition team with qualified people. And so in my case, my grandfather had also been a diplomat and was also ambassador to Austria. And so they kind of came to me and said, would you be interested in serving, and maybe an ambassadorship or whatever? And I had donated to the Republican Party, and I had some other contacts there who also were supportive. And so I thought, why not? It was always sort of in the back of my mind. Number one, to serve my country. That was always a dream of mine. And number two, to do something, abroad with diplomacy. And so I said, sure. And it was just an insane process of like a root canal of going through all of my financial affairs. And then the FBI interviewed people I'd known my entire life, at different stages in order to give me my top secret security clearance. And then all of a sudden I was like sitting in a Senate hearing, testifying in front of a bunch of senators. And I am, proud to admit I was unanimously confirmed by the U.S. Senate.
That's awesome. And after being on the inside, what do you think would surprise the most about your day to day, or about what an ambassador does from the outs for anybody on the outside? What do you think is the most surprising thing, or would surprise most of people?
A lot of my friends have been watching this show on Netflix called The Diplomat. And what's interesting is there's a lot that's accurate about it. It's not totally unlike how my life was. Obviously, it's sort of all made for Hollywood. But there's a couple things that do bug me. The one is, when you need to go somewhere, the government does not send a Gulfstream jet for you. They, let you buy a coach ticket. In fact, most people would be surprised to hear, as an ambassador, which is the same rank as a four-star general, that you get exactly two business class tickets the entire time you're ambassador. One to post, and one when you return back for the last time. Other than that, you fly coach, or you pay yourself to upgrade. And similarly, you pretty much pay for everything. I mean, you have a tiny entertainment budget, and you can't even use that budget to entertain your own team, because your events have to be more than 50% non-US citizens. So in my case, I had 400 or so people who work for me. If I wanted to do a holiday party or 4th of July, I had to pay for it myself. The other thing is no cell phones. So certainly never in the office. It's a secure environment. So when I see that woman on The Diplomat, on her cell phone in her office, it's like that would never happen. And the ambassador's office is kind of like almost like a sacred space. I mean, you have to have a reason to be in that part of the building, and it's not busy at all. It's like, so, but it's a crazy life.
And going more in detail into the day to day, any routines or any specific strategies or anything that you can share that you picked up from your time in public service that you're now applying to your tech life as an entrepreneur, or that you could have applied in your previous life in the other companies?
Yeah, actually, I would say it in reverse. So the United States is a little bit unique in as much as about a third of our ambassadors are chosen by the White House and not career. And it's a topic of controversy. And to be candid, in some cases it's worked out extremely well, in some cases extremely poorly. But in general, I think it's a very good system for a couple of reasons. The first is that the people they pick tend to have had very important careers or professional lives, and therefore a lot of information and best practices they bring into the bureaucracy. So, the State Department is, writ large on almost 90,000 people, and they need the new DNA bringing in perspectives and ideas. It's very healthy. And the other thing is that the ambassadors tend to have close connections to the White House, which make them more important than they would be if they were career to the foreign country. But in my case, I brought OKRs and business type objectives to my country team, to the diplomatic work I was doing. And so, my point to my team was, you're all brilliant, you're all excellent, and I expect like excellence as a baseline. But I want all of you to come back to me and tell me, how will you transform this relationship? What's your personal OKR for what are you and your team going to do to take this to the next level? And that was, I think, thinking they hadn't seen. And also, when you're in tech and you're talking to media, whatever, you know how to speak to a reporter or to I spoke to students and religious leaders, and about half the job is in the building, setting goals and objectives. In my case, I had 13 branches of government that reported to me, hundreds of people. And but the other half of the job is meeting with the leaders, meeting with the parliament, meeting with the media, religious leaders, business leaders, students, and also touring the regions of the country. So you have to know how to bring out the charm, how to engage people, how to clearly communicate what are our objectives.
Trevor, I have to ask, what's your view on the upcoming U.S. elections? I know there's a couple of few names, new names in the Democratic Party, maybe RFK, a couple of new names in the Republican Party, maybe DeSantis. Do you think, are you excited about these new names, or do you think this will be most likely a rematch between Trump and Biden?
Well, we're still months away, so anything can happen. I think that's the first thing. I
Yeah.
would say, absent possible surprises, it will probably be Biden and Trump. Possible surprises on Biden would be either a health related thing or possibly some kind uh, more detail on these revelations of selling influence for money. On Trump, it could be either another indictment, or it could be that these legal troubles weigh him down so much that someone like a DeSantis could overtake him over the course of the primaries. And so those are possibilities. But right now, I would say it's most likely going to be Biden versus Trump. And it's a bit of a contrarian point of view, but I would say if that's the case, I would actually predict that Trump would win. But there's, again, a lot to be seen.
Trevor, thanks so much for a terrific conversation. Before I let you go, want to give you some minutes for any closing remarks. Where can people find more about you, about Kresus, your current company, anything else that you want to share?
Well,
Please go ahead.
Croesus, first of all, do you know the story of Croesus? Croesus was a king in ancient Greece who changed the world because he created the first fungible coins around 550 BC. So every Croesus coin had exactly the same amount of metal. And that was a really big innovation, which allowed for commerce, the arts, even democracy based on this currency he created. So I love the analogy, but no one could spell Croesus. And so I simplified the spelling to just Kresus, like Croesus, because that was phonetically right. So Kresus, was the name I picked, but in the App Store, you can find the Kresus super app and crypto wallet. So download that or go to the Kresus website. And even if you don't want to buy any crypto, you can mint an NFT for free and you can learn. And I think people really do need to get educated on the blockchain, just because I do think in the future it's going to affect all of us. And so a little literacy is important. And other than that, I would encourage anyone whose dream it is to be an entrepreneur to just do it. The thing I learned as an entrepreneur is you really don't need to know anything. You just need to know how to learn on the job. So I like if anyone ever saw that movie, The Matrix, it's like, he steps into a helicopter and he's like, now I need to download a program for how to fly a helicopter. That's what being an entrepreneur is like. You just figure it out. If you can do that and you can be stubborn enough to refuse to fail, those two characteristics will make you successful. And you don't have to go to MIT or Harvard or know everything. You just have to have those convictions.
Awesome.